welcome back to my channel. So today I want to do a video about the ENFJ personality type. I want to talk about their strengths and weaknesses and their cognitive functions and what makes them so special. So if you're familiar with Myers Briggs but you don't know what a cognitive function is, it's going to be really important to this video. So I have the 8 cognitive functions listed here because Myers Briggs came after what Carl Jung coined in 1921, which are the cognitive functions. Then the 16 Personalities website came along and they kind of collapsed these cognitive functions, so they combined introverted feeling and extroverted feeling to just be one feeling function. So they've kind of collapsed it into just 4-letter dichotomies. So these are the 8 cognitive functions here. If you want to pause it, briefly look over this. It's by no means exhaustive, but it can kind of get you going in sort of the right direction. So each of the 16 personality type uses all 8 cognitive functions in a specific order, which gives them a specific flavor. So for the ENFJ, this is the order that they use the 8 cognitive functions, and loosely speaking, this is descending in order of importance, and also loosely speaking, this is descending chronologically and in what order these get developed throughout your lifetime. So it's kind of debated, but some people will say your first function is the first one to become a strength, and then maybe your teens and 20s the second one, maybe your 30s the third one, and your 40s the fourth one, and so on. So to add some nuance to this, your top 4 functions are the functions that you're conscious of and that you value. So even if maybe it's not a strength in you yet, you still value these, and maybe you'll pick a partner who has these traits because you value these things in the world. Your bottom 4 functions, you're not conscious of how you use them, and you also don't consciously value them. So this is where some biases can kind of show up. So to add even more layers to this, the functions I've listed in green are your potential strengths, and the functions listed in red are your probable weaknesses. But I want to reiterate again that this is, loosely speaking, descending in order of importance. So just because 5 and 6 are green doesn't mean I would hop into focusing on those, because this is still descending in order of importance. So within the top 4, because these are conscious and valued, there's so much meat to unpack here. So I'm going to spend this video getting specific into the ENFJ's top 4 cognitive functions. So I have this overused, underused, strength, weakness matrix here that I'm going to kind of go through, and I'm going to specifically apply that to the ENFJ. So if you want a little bit more information on this, I have this slide here. I'm not going to go over it because I have another video about it, but it's got quotes from Carl Jung and John Beebe and Myers Briggs for what they say the different function placements will do to a personality. Okay, so getting into the ENFJ's first cognitive function, your overused strength. So your first cognitive function is extraverted feeling, abbreviated FE. It's kind of the opposite order that you might think. And so extrovert means to turn outward. Vert means to turn, extra means outward. And so Carl Jung got the words introvert and extrovert from externospection and introspection, which means to watch over what's happening inwardly or watch over what's happening outwardly. So it doesn't necessarily mean to be in a group or to be by yourself, although it's certainly easier if you're by yourself to turn inward and watch over what's happening inwardly. But you could be at a party with 40 people, for example, and you could be tuning them all out, and you're turning inward and processing within your own mind. So it's not necessarily being alone or with people, although that does make it easier for sure. So to extrovert means to turn outward, and when you look outward, there's a lot of options of things that people could look at. But in the case of extroverted feeling, it's looking outward at the feeling criteria. How are the feelings? What are the feelings of everyone here? What are the values of everyone here? How are we jiving? What's the rapport? Are we in harmony? Are we all kind of working in sync? And very good at navigating the social atmosphere. So the number 1 word that Carl Jung used with extroverted feeling is harmony. And the number 1 goal, he said, with extroverted feeling users is the creation and formation of harmonious relationships. So this is your number 1 strength. This is the function that's been with you the longest. It's who you feel like you are. It's been with you throughout your whole life. This is like the water you swim in. It's who you feel like you are. So if I get into some of this and you feel like it's not resonating, a lot of the online tests are very frequently wrong. They're well known to be very unreliable. So it's better to type yourself based on learning about the cognitive functions and typing yourself in that way than taking an online test, because they're very often unreliable. So this is who you feel like you are. So some traits of extroverted feeling is they're friendly, warmth, welcoming, encouraging. And I put an arrow here for how this could show up practically. Like a lot of times they'll have very beautiful homes. This is partially with that extroverted sensing, which I'll get to, but it's this welcoming environment, and that gets applied to then the environment. Or championing people's dreams. I've noticed them be incredibly encouraging, wanting to know what are people's ambitions, and really encouraging them to step out in that way. So there's a lot of warmth, smiles, hugs. There's a very specific extroverted feeling tone of voice that I notice with people that's very kind and encouraging. But it's just so tuned into the feeling environment and wanting to impact it in a positive way. They want to arouse positive corresponding feelings in other people is a big quote. So they're constantly kind of almost like pawns in a chess game, trying to figure out how to navigate the social atmosphere to make sure that the vibe is up. Community is a huge word within extroverted feeling. So there's, it could be church, it could be with friends, it could be going to the theater, but community becomes a very important word. So practically with the arrow that I have here, I've noticed ENFJs who regularly have like a girls' night out, or they regularly have bachelor night or football night, or, whatever it is, it's kind of like this regular community that they've created. Extrovert feeling is oriented around objective values. So one word that can be thrown out, feeling, could be your feelings, it could be values. That's another big word. And that extrovert, that kind of external, this objective values, what people say. And so people just objectively think that saying please and thank you is a good thing. It's part of these traditional values. There's a lot about etiquette. And so this next bullet point, they know what's tactful, what's fitting, and what's appropriate, how to accommodate for another person. And so they're really good at saying just the right thing. They're really good with their words. They really have spent a lot of time watching people and the slight, reading the slight body language of other people. So they know what things people value. They're really tuned into what the group values. And so they read the feelings of others, and from just a small change in someone's body language, maybe they change their posture or their facial expression, and the extroverted feeler will adjust themselves accordingly to make sure that it kind of maneuvers and facilitates the conversation in the right direction. So your first function is who you feel like you are. So a lot of times if people are feeling down or they're not feeling like themselves, it's because they haven't created an environment which really keys into this first function. So it's so important to be around people that value your first function and to create an environment yourself where your first function can thrive. So your first function is an extroverted function. And so what that gives you access to, Carl Jung says, is the world and action taking. You're looking outward toward what's going on out here and you're taking action accordingly. So you're looking outward to the feelings of others. Maybe you adjust yourself to see what's the most tactful thing. So I have a few images here. I've got some people around a barbecue, or, we've got the bridesmaids here gathering people around a table. The charcuterie board, that's a crowd pleaser, or maybe having a candle for the reason that it makes your home more welcoming and inviting. I've got this person, helping kind of, this person's got this messy web of thoughts, and this person's kind of helping them straighten it out. And that can be something that extroverted feelers will do a lot of times. So this first function gives you access to the world and action taking. But everyone needs a second function to kind of round you out, and this is an introverted function, which gives you access to the self and reflection. So they're both so important. Everyone, if they're just in their first function, like when you're young, you can be kind of one-dimensional. But then as you get a little bit older, you get this second function, and it rounds you out, and it makes you a more complex character. And this is true for all the personality types. So this is your first introverted function. So this gives you access to the self and reflection. So introvert means to turn inward. So you're looking inwardly and watching what's happening inwardly, processing. And what you're keyed into out of all the things that are happening inwardly, there's lots of things, is it's keyed into the intuitions. So intuition is the opposite of sensing. A lot of times when I define intuition, it's easier to define sensing first, so you can see what the opposite of that is. So sensing is what you have experienced with your five senses. So the opposite of that is what you have not experienced with your senses. So this could be a hunch, this could be the future, but it's kind of a rumination and a processing of your future and your vision. So the number one word associated with this function from Carl Jung is vision, and concerned with the meaning of the vision, and transforms the vision into his own life. So this function is your underused strength. So this is something that maybe you were born with a talent in, but maybe you haven't leaned into developing the skill in this function. So for that reason, this function as a default can really be neglected in people. People very commonly will neglect their second function, but when they come back to it, they feel like it's coming home to themselves because you're an ENFJ. So to neglect this function is neglecting a huge part of yourself as an intuitive. So a lot of times people might use their second function, but they use it maybe in only one area of their life, or that maybe they just kind of water it down, so they're not using the full strength of it. So it's really good to work on this function and lean into it to become a more multi-dimensional, complex individual. So one way that I've seen it with NJs, I've seen this a lot, are vision boards. So I have like a vision board down here, or like a vision book. I made a vision book kind of processing your future, and time spent meditating on the future. So I think that this is something where ENFJs can lean into that a little bit more. I think when you think of a vision board, that's still quite sensory. Maybe you make a digital vision board, and that's still, you're still turning outward, you're like doing this thing. But to spend more time and in a more in-depth way, meditating on what you want your future to be like. And instead of maybe limiting it to like images, like a vision board is kind of these sensory images, maybe writing for a long time, slowing down. Like sometimes people might make a vision board, they do it in an hour and like, okay, fun, and next year I'll think about my future. But spending time regularly meditating on your future in a slow way, journaling about it daily, journaling about purpose for pages and pages, to slow down and really meditate and soak in it. Another thing that Introverted Intuition is concerned with, according to Carl Jung, is meaning, purpose, and insight. So what can be really good is for ENFJs to slow down, get alone time spent viewing one thing from multiple angles. So you think about your job from this angle and this angle and this angle. You try to see it from as many perspectives as possible, even perspectives that maybe you disagree with. Or maybe you think about your spouse and, just whatever the topic could be, viewing things from multiple angles, and thinking about ideas in general. So this is why I think it's so good to contrast introversion from just alone time, because a lot of times people might just like binge Netflix for a few hours, and that's not really meaningful alone time. When we're talking about introverted intuition, we're talking about a meaningful reflection on purpose and insight. Because when you watch Netflix, you're turned outward. That's still not really turning inward to what you think and your reflections and your intuitions about things. Introverted intuition can be a lot about symbolism and paradoxes and speaking in that way. So I think it creates kind of a esoteric, it's kind of a cool, maybe ethereal way that adds kind of a certain language to ENFJs. They are so good with their words with extraverted feeling. And I think when you add introverted intuition, they're just really OP with like how good they are with crafting language in a certain way. So spending time analyzing symbolism in music, movies, and life, speaking in analogies or dissecting analogies or really thinking about an analogy or metaphor from different angles. And I think doing this in a non-sensory environment, this is the opposite of extroverted sensing, which I'll get to, but really leaning into detaching from the sensory environment. You're in a dark room, it's quiet, you're just thinking and like kind of ruminating to yourself. And Carl Jung talks about they see the future in more or less a clear outline, and there's like this focus on their own life paths. And it doesn't feel like there's lots of options in contrast to extroverted intuition, which the NPs have. It feels like in this bottom left picture, it feels like you have this one path and it didn't feel like you really had a say in it. It just feels like you were born knowing that this is the path and you can't deviate from it. So it's important to continue to choose the bright future that's on the path over a fun present. And what I mean by that is prioritizing things of long-standing value that in the future you're going to thank yourself for, as opposed to just fun in the present moment. So if you have to choose between things that are fun now but not fun later, or fun later but not fun now, choose the things that are of futuristic value. So this could be included in like choosing a partner. If you see some, they're fun now, but they're, it's not really going to have long-standing value, choose the long-standing value. So this is the function that I recommend people work on for an extended amount of time, like 5 years. So when I say work on it, I mean you could get around INJs who use introverted intuition first and kind of copy what they do and kind of learn from them. And then you can also just try to lean into the quiet, still, non-sensory environment. I think this is the opposite of extroverted sensing. So I think naturally when you get out of a very intense sensory environment, you're just alone in a dark room, it's quiet, it's slow. These type of intuitions just naturally tend to crop up for ENFJs. So spending more time in a slow environment, and not just being alone watching Netflix, but a meaningful rumination on your vision. And so I've heard from a lot of people that this is why they feel like they come home to themselves, because you're an ENFJ. So this is really coming back to yourself. And Carl Jung says that this second function lends range and prospect. It adds complexity to the type. It's so much more of a more interesting, complex individual, when that extroversion gives you access to the world and action taking, and the introversion gives you access to the self and reflection. You become so much more multidimensional. So John Beebe calls the second function the parent function. So this is the way you can parent yourself. You can set expectations for yourself, hold yourself accountable, take responsibility for things. It makes people a lot more mature. If you think about a good parent, there's a lot of maturity within this function that you have access to. So, hold yourself accountable to this life that you want to live. You have this long-term vision, and make sure that you actually do that thing and hold yourself accountable, have some maturity and responsibility in this function. I think when you combine extroverted feeling with introverted intuition, you get this individual who's so incredibly wise and knows how to communicate that to people, who knows how to make people feel heard, who knows how to move language in a certain way to really persuade a group with really deep insights. It really feels like it's just an OP combination to have. So I'll get to the story at the very end when I talk about like ENFJ's unique gift to the world and a story involving that. But this second function is how you can really teach people and impact people. Because a lot of times your first function, you're just a natural at it. So it's kind of hard to teach people something that you're a natural at. But this second function, you were born with a talent in it, but if you have to put in the work, put in the responsibility, the 5 years working on it, and then after that, on the other side of that, then you can kind of teach people how to get into this function and mentor people in this way. And I'll have a story about it at the end, but it's really important to, when you want to impact people, a lot of times the second function is how you can really teach people and mentor people. I mean, you certainly have impact in both of the top two functions, but in a mentorship capacity and a teaching capacity, you can really teach people so well in your second function. So moving on to your third function, extroverted sensing. So extrovert means to turn outward. And this time, instead of turning outward to the feeling criteria, like the first function, it's turning outward toward the sensory environment. And for ENFJs, this is their overused weakness. Everyone's third function is the overused weakness. And the reason it's overused is because this is an extroverted function and you're an extrovert. So there's a tendency to overindulge in the third function and a tendency to neglect the second function. But it's described as shadowy, egotistical. There's a lot of hubris there. It's kind of like, I described it as like a bratty teenager. John Beebe describes it as the child. It's got a lot of cowardice, kind of haughty. It thinks that it knows more than it does. It's like a teenager that just discovered something for the first time and feels the need to kind of like tell everyone about it a lot. So the thing about this function is that it's the direct opposite of your second function. Since your second function is introverted, your third function is extroverted. Since your second one is intuition, the opposite of intuition is sensing. So extroverted sensing and introverted intuition are the direct opposites of each other. And so it's kind of like, I've used the analogy like North Pole and South Pole, or like flipping on a light switch. And the light switch cannot be flipped on and flipped off at the same time. You have to pick. You can't be at the North Pole and the South Pole at the same time. You have to pick. So if you choose to be in this third function, the South Pole, you're choosing not to be at the North Pole because you cannot be at them both at the same time. So by choosing the extroversion, that this kind of seems comfortable, like this function seems to give you extroversion, which is comfortable, you're choosing to rid yourself of that intuition, and you're an ENFJ. And people do it so much, a lot of times people will type themselves based on this third function. It's so common. So it's incredibly common for people to be in their first and third functions, for people to be in their third function so much that they think it's their dominant function. So it's a very immature child function. A lot of times you'll see this with people who are immature, or you'll see this if people are defensive or in conflict. I think if you're in a long-term relationship with someone, you're a lot more likely to see this third function than maybe as an acquaintance you would. But this can show up a lot in defensiveness and conflict. So the number one word associated with extroverted sensing is sensation. And Carl Jung talks about they desire the strongest sensations, the peak of highest sensation, maybe unusual sensations. So a lot of times when a function is in the red zone, or in this third spot in particular, you take on the bad qualities of that function without some of the good qualities, or even the function's good qualities kind of get tainted into something else when it's in this third position. So I have arrows here for how this can get tainted, and I've really keyed in on the negative qualities of extroverted sensing. So an issue with extroverted sensing is it has little tendency for reflection. Meaning and purpose may pass them by. And you can see how this is the direct opposite of introverted intuition, because introverted intuition was a lot about purpose and meaning and reflecting on those things. But this function is the opposite of that, so it has little tendency for reflection, meaning and purpose may pass them by. So the advice then is to stop, to slow down, to journal, to reflect, to think about meaning and purpose. And especially to reflect on the future. I think it seems kind of counterintuitive. A lot of times when we talk about reflection, we're doing it kind of retrospectively, like reflect on the past. But reflect on the future and how you want the future to go. Because you have this vision, and reflect on the vision and kind of detail that out more. One quote from extroverted sensing is that it can be shallow. So an example of that is that optics can become more important than actuality. So I've thought of some ENFJs, this is not necessarily the stereotype or common to not all ENFJs, but sometimes there are some who are very concerned about optics. This can manifest by having a very well curated like Instagram account. They host an event and they want the pictures to be very beautiful of the event, or they want the decorations to be very beautiful of the event. But the reality of it is kind of different. What people actually experienced is different than the optics become. Extroverted sensing is strong in activity. It's very busy. It's very conscious of like, oh, look at this. Oh, look at this. Look at this. It's kind of like squirrel-like sometimes, I think, in a negative sense. So sometimes extroverted sensing third, you can take on the busyness of extroverted sensing without the presence of extroverted sensing. Extroverted sensing is incredibly present and realistic and grounded. That's a good trait of extroverted sensing. But in this case, sometimes I feel like they're really busy. Like I've been to parties before with ENFJs and they're getting everything organized and they're just busy the whole time and not really stopping and really being with any of the people there. They really kind of like facilitate this thing, but sometimes you feel like they're just like running around and they're so busy and you don't feel like you've really gotten a chance to slow down and really enjoy the thing. It's just a focus on looking like things are being enjoyed rather than actually enjoyed. Extroverted sensing has a strong capacity for enjoyment. So this could be overspending, partying. I heard one person talk about an ENFJ before that they've never been around them except for in a big group or in a big party. They don't know that they never spent time with them one-on-one. And a lot of people agreed. They're like, yeah, I only know this person in a group. I actually only know them really on an acquaintance level. And so I think that too much of this extroverted sensing kind of leaves people feeling like there's like an emptiness or not feeling like there's deep relationships there. I did have this person, I've seen sometimes ENFJs who have anger issues. I didn't include that as a bullet point because it's not really common, but I have seen it before, so I did want to sort of include it in this picture. Extroverted sensing is so in its body, and so showing anger in an incredibly bodily way. And then, like I said, alcohol, it depends on what sensory indulgence. I've got Lululemon or an expensive bag. So expensive clothing or perfume, that can be an examples of this. It's part of, what makes them so attractive. I think that that's a great thing that extroverted sensing gives ENFJs. So it's not all bad. Like in the same way that teenagers are not all bad. There's a lot of idealism that children bring, but it's important to, since this third function is the child, as John Beebe calls it, or kind of like this bratty teenager, it's important to allow that second function, the parent, to parent this third function, to set expectations. Okay, extrovert sensing, it's okay if we're going to use you in these ways. If you're going to give us energy and you're going to, we take up jogging and that's really good for our body, or you help me look attractive, that's good. But extroverted sensing, we don't want to use you in this way where we're, things are becoming fake, or we're using you for optics, or now we're overspending in the attempt to look attractive, So it gives some moderation and it kind of subordinates extroverted sensing to that introverted intuition and sets boundaries for, these are the appropriate ways to use it, but these are not the appropriate ways to use it. And we think about what are the long-term implications of this thing. It's really helpful. So now we get into your fourth function, introverted thinking. So this is your underused weakness. So your third function and fourth function are both weaknesses, but they're kind of different. So this one is a weakness because it's not used enough. John Beebe calls this like the inferiority complex. People think they're really bad at it, but you're not actually as bad at it as you think you are. There is some vulnerability there because you're not a natural at it. You're not good at it. It is objectively a weakness, but you're not as bad at it as you think you are. It's more vulnerability than actuality, how bad you are. So this function is the opposite of your first function, the direct opposite. Since your first function is extroverted, this one's introverted. Since your first one is feeling, this one is thinking. So introverted thinking is your fourth function. So introvert means to turn inward. Once again, this is your second introverted function. But this time what you're turning inward toward is the thinking criteria. Parsing your thoughts. How does this make sense to you, distinct from the group? Finding nuance and distinctions. And so once again, this is a situation where you got the light switch or North Pole, South Pole. You can only be at the first one or the fourth one. You cannot be at the both at the same time. So since your first function is who you feel like you are, and you can only be at one at a time, it makes sense why people would hardly ever be in their fourth function, because it's the opposite of who you feel like you are. But if you sprinkle it into your personality, you can really add some fullness. A lot of times people have the belief, my first function and my first function only will get me what my first function wants. So that could be harmony, and harmony only will get me more harmony. Or good relationships and good relationships only will get me good relationships. Or being friendly and being friendly only will get me more friends. Or I could substitute different words for extroverted feeling. But a lot of times it can actually create a prison. In the case of extroverted feeling, sometimes it's conflict, which will actually create harmony, which is kind of counterintuitive. So it's sprinkling in that introverted thinking, which will get more extroverted feeling. Or sometimes, there are quotes about how sometimes people feel like they can't really say what they really think around extroverted feelers because it feels like we all have to get along and all be thinking the same thing, so you end up feeling stifled. So sometimes sprinkling in this introverted thinking says, we can all think different things, and actually people like that. People actually like discord. There are some people who like arguing and like discord, so kind of counterintuitively that will create more harmony. So this is kind of an interesting function to sprinkle in. So extroverted feeling can be very sensitive to praise and criticism. So I have that listed here. So I hope that if you're an ENFJ listening, this hasn't come across too strong. I love ENFJs. They're an incredibly important type. So I don't want ENFJs to get the wrong impression. But introverted thinking can give you a better balance where neither praise or criticism is valued too highly. And information is just taken matter-of-factly. So introverted thinking, it sees information very like computer code, or it's almost kind of dry. It's not like there's feelings attached to it. Like if they point out that someone's wrong, it's not like a criticism of the person. It's just it's a thought thing separate from the person. It's just this objective thing, and they didn't mean anything negative by it. It's just this very matter of fact. Here's the information, here's the facts, and it's just kind of a critique of the fact in general, not the person. So I think some sprinkling in of this gives extrovert feelers maybe a little bit more backbone, where they can stand on things. And if someone praises you, I think that if people don't want to take criticism too highly, they also have to not take praise too highly, because if praise really lights you up, then when you don't get it, then that's also going to be an issue. So you have to kind of distance yourself from your relationship to both praise and criticism. And introverted thinking allows you to think, what do I think of things? Regardless of what externally people think, what do I think about things? Extroverted feeling, if there's too much extroverted feeling, people can lose sight of their own viewpoint. But introverted thinking gives some skepticism. So think, what do I think about this? Does this make sense to me? And it allows people to not delegate their thought system to loved ones. I think sometimes if extrovert feelers don't want to get into introverted thinking, a lot of times they'll just delegate to whatever their spouse thinks. They just think about things, or whatever the group that they're around thinks. They think about those things. So wherever they were born, whatever general beliefs were in the area they were born, just become their beliefs. But it allows you to think, what do I think about this? What are the odds that my loved ones are right about everything, or the people I was around are right about everything? What if they're wrong? That's okay if they're wrong. That's not a make or break thing. So it's, doing your own thinking and having some more skepticism. And I see this a lot more with ENFJs that are like 40s and up. I think this is a function that gets developed a lot more the older you are. But some of these, if I'm thinking of, teens, 20s ENFJs, a lot of times this introverted thinking is completely absent. A critique of extroverted feeling is that it can appear to be insincere, that they're putting on a pose, or it can be kind of hollow. Carl Jung talks about it's not actually inauthentic, or it's not actually hollow, but it can seem that way when in one room you're affirming this, and then in another room you're affirming this. And I've heard extroverted feelers say, just because I affirm something doesn't mean I believe that thing. But I think what they need to understand is, I think extroverted feeling is maybe one of the only functions that does that will affirm things that they do not personally believe. So this allows you to reveal yourself. What do you actually think? Sometimes when I'm around extroverted feelers, I'm like, come on, give it to me straight. I don't want to just be, affirmed all the time. What do you really think? If you disagree with me, tell me you disagree with me. So I think ENFJs are a type that, they can reveal themselves a little bit more. I think sometimes I feel like relationships with ENFJs can feel one-sided, like they're, questioning me. How does that make me feel? What do you want to do with your life? And they spend so much time questioning, and which I really appreciate. That's something I really value. It's one of their biggest strengths. But I also want to know, what do you think about things? Who are you? I want to have a complete relationship. I don't want to feel one-sided. I want to know the ENFJ. So I think introverted thinking allows you to really reveal yourself and your thoughts about things. Extroverted feeling can have a lot of denial or repression of inharmonious facts. So they can be ready to overlook faults. So a lot of times, maybe early on in a relationship, this person's exhibiting some kind of red flags, and it's just, if they like someone, sometimes it can be a little too easy to deny or kind of repress things that they don't want to see in a person. So it's really important to, introverted thinking sees the facts over the person. They kind of detach the facts from the person. These are the facts, and it's not good or bad or make or break or anything, but these are just the facts, very matter-of-factly. And so it'd be very good to sprinkle in some introverted thinking so you can see the facts over the person. A lot of times, the closer a person is to an ENFJ, the more likely they are to overlook things or really want to deny things. So it gives ENFJs some standards, I think, for the people that they're around. And I think that something that happens with the fourth function, everyone's fourth function, is a lot of times it's completely absent, and then there's this big spike of it, and then it goes back to being absent. But what you want to do instead of this big oscillation is just raise the level so you use introverted thinking a little bit more regularly. So you avoid these spikes. Those spikes are called a grip. So for an ENFJ, all of a sudden maybe there's no TI, and all of a sudden, boom, there's this huge spike of introverted thinking. So all of a sudden it's this person's a narcissist and I'm cutting them off and no one ever values me and I'm never getting anyone a gift again. I would say that that's kind of rare, and you have to really be close to an ENFJ to see that type of thing. The vast majority of the time they're up in this green zone. But it can happen where all of a sudden they're just writing people off. Extroverted feeling is incredibly self-sacrificial, which I think is a very admirable trait, most of the time. But I think it goes too far. I think it can really be hard for the ENFJ. So I want to say, don't take on others' issues too much, and give space to work on yourself. I think sometimes the self-sacrifice, it's genuinely selfless. It's for a good intent. But I think sometimes if you think about this Enneagram 2 type behavior, which I think there's probably a strong correlation for ENFJs being Enneagram 2s, but the Enneagram 2 tendency is to work on others, to see other people as projects so that they don't have to work on themselves. And I think that's a subconscious belief. But when you spend a lot of time working on other people, then you don't have to work on some of your own issues. So the issues with extroverts, introverts have their own issues, but the issue with extroverts, Carl Jung says, they lose themselves in the toils of the world. They're so focused on the world outwardly all the time, or in this case, other people, that they can kind of lose themselves. And so you don't want to lose yourself by working on other people, or, sometimes I've been the project of FE users before, and sometimes I don't like feeling like a project or feeling less than, that they have their life together and they need to come work on me. But I think this function has a capacity to add a lot of complexity to ENFJs. Everyone's fourth function does. I heard the quote that you don't really know someone until you've met their fourth function. A lot of times people will slowly reveal their functions to you, like as an acquaintance, you know their FE, maybe you know their NI or their SE, but it takes a while before you really meet that fourth function. And so I really count it a privilege when people really bring me into that fourth function. So I want to get into like ENFJ's unique gift, or kind of a story. At this timing, the reason I kind of bumped this one up, I wasn't scheduled to do this video yet, but I bumped it up because I just went to a party hosted by an ENFJ, and I just thought that there were so many things that happened that were so stereotypically ENFJ that I was like, I need to talk about this in a video. And I didn't type the person based on stereotypes. I typed the person first before this very stereotypical stuff happened, but it did happen. So I got invited to a visioning party. So it's a party where I didn't really know what it was going to be, but it's a party where you go and you vision about your dreams. And I was like, wow, this is very NI. This is looking very NI. So the way it worked was, and I want to point out the different functions as it happened, is so you show up, and at first you're all just like mingling and eating food. So kind of FE, SE, I would say. And then they open the doors and they go into this other room, and it's like dark with the mood lighting. So that's very NI. It's getting like, less SE, less bright or whatever. It was this dark room, and they handed us all these booklets to answer these questions in, and they gave these list of questions for people to fill out. So the purpose of your life is hidden in the dreams of your heart. Dreams can be born out of pain. A part of our responsibility is to nurture the vision even when you don't see it. I just thought some of these things were so stereotypical because I talk about how the second function is the function, it's the parent, where you have a lot of responsibility and maturity. And here this thing that she wrote up says, part of our responsibility is to nurture the vision, which I thought that was so interesting, that this nurturing of the vision is part of you showing up and being more responsible. And then it's focused a lot about dream killers, or dreams can be born out of pain, and really acknowledging the pain. I thought that was it's a very extroverted feeling focus. That's not something that I ever key on. I did make a vision book myself, but I never keyed on that FE sense. And so then the biggest portion of the party was then people would go up, she wanted people to go up to the mic, share what their dream was, and then everyone would encourage them. And the encouragement, that FE encouragement was so much of the time. And I thought that was just so fascinating. So that went on for a couple hours, this dream sharing and this encouragement. And she wanted to be able to facilitate people to, connect people. And then at the end, she brought in a DJ, and then there was a big dance party, which was very SE. So I thought this was very, very stereotypically ENFJ. And I think that was a great event. I thought that was a really good blend of some of these different functions. I was like, wow, this is wow, I'm just so blessed to have been able to go to such a stereotypically ENFJ event. And I talked about your second function is the function where you can really mentor people and teach people. So I was thinking about my first function being Introverted Intuition. When I made my vision book, the prompts basically just say, okay, vision, do this thing. And the understanding for me is that it's just obvious how to vision. And there was no how to vision. But she actually, because her second function, she actually wrote out, this is how you vision. This is how you find access to a vision. This is how you learn what a vision is. And so I thought that was so great for someone who has worked on Introverted Intuition to then come and be able to show people that. And I think that was so impactful. There were a lot of people who talked about that, they felt like their dreams had died, and she really created an encouraging environment where people felt like they could be vulnerable and share. I thought that was just a great event and great decorations. One thing that I always see that I think the parties that ENFJs throw are so great. The outfits are great. The decorations are great. This comes from that SE third. I think SE third is one of the most attractive functions. I thought it was really well done. I thought that it just showed the impact that people can have, the FE encouragement with the teaching people how to vision, with the backdrop of this SE food and SE decorations and the SE music. I mean, the decorations were just immaculate. The only function that I really didn't see that much was introverted thinking. So if you want to watch more videos about ENFJs, I will have my ENFJ playlist linked in the description. It's all the videos I've made about ENFJs, as well as I have my cognitive functions playlist linked in the description. So if you want to deep dive into extroverted feeling, introverted intuition, it's like 45-minute deep dives on all these functions. You can find that there. So yeah, thanks so much for watching. Bye.